Good afternoon, collective. This is Al. I actually just written a piece that I wanted to expand upon because of the fact that it dealt with like a topic that a lot of people feel a little uncomfortable with from time to time. And it's one of the challenges that a lot of conscious leaders are going to be facing as we evolve and move forward as a species, which is that sometimes some of the most important conversations that need to be had are slightly uncomfortable because they tend to trigger people into feeling a sense of fear. And so, what I wanted to do with this particular post was talk about the subject of death, if you will, but not from the standpoint of the scary that it represents in the unknown, but more about what we do know about the celebration of life and why we should every day spend it in complete joy and celebration of each moment that we have. Life is not guaranteed, as many of us know, and part of the challenges that we face as conscious leaders is helping people find a sense of peace in kind of the chaos. And nowhere can that be more said than when we broach the subject of the end of life. So one of the things that I was really focused on when I was writing the piece is I had stumbled across a movie, if you will, that was kind of helping me maybe look at things a little bit more in-depthly, in the sense that I was able to look at the situation of what it is that drives people the most insane about the subject, which for a lot of people has to do with the ability to let go of either physical possessions or some sort of anchor that keeps us trapped to this idea that upon the day that it's our final hour that we can't let go. And so what I wanted to speak on is kind of helping people understand that where there is grace, there is light, and that we just don't consciously always know what we are to expect in that particular time. And so one of the things that we're finding as we kind of develop and grow is that we are finding that humanity is at a place now where it can start to tackle these things in a way that brings serenity to the subject and helps people understand that it's not an omen to talk about it. In fact, with so many of our children and so many of the people in our planet and war and turmoil, death is kind of more common than we really want to address. And so as conscious leaders, one of the things we can do for each other is kind of help illuminate what the cycle has been like from what we've experienced, either in near-death experiences or what we understand of the value to faith. And so on that subject, what I wanted to do is expand upon the article that I posted on LinkedIn on my blog, in the sense that I wanted people to really understand the concept of faith and why it matters so much for a lot of people. And what it comes down to in this particular scenario is that when you have faith, you project what you believe will happen into your last moments on earth. And it gives you a sense of a place to go and what to expect. And from what I can gather from the research I've done in the experiences that I've had myself in a near-death experience twice, I will say that it was exactly what I imagined it to be as an exit, because my last fleeting thoughts of my life were all to project what it is that I wanted to perceive as I exited. And what I saw was exactly what I believed. And it goes back to that thing about we manifest our own destiny. And the end of the piece was very specific. You project your fate. And so for a lot of people in our world, it's just a very touchy subject because no one ever wants to talk about what may happen to us on that day. And what it does is it creates fear. And I'm finding sometimes, more often than not, that people get stuck in the sense of dread. And when they dread it, they just don't want to talk about it. And so they don't really put any stock into what they will project upon those final moments. And one of the great things about spirituality and about faith is it allows us to collectively focus on a target to what we will experience and what we will see. And as a conscious leader, though we represent many houses, each house is varied in what they perceive that end result to be. But that doesn't change the fact that we as an entirety of a species all share one thing, two things in common, life and death. And so instead of being fearful of it and bringing about more reasons to be afraid, more disease and more other things that can kind of test us in our faith, one of the things that we can do as a collective is to band together and kind of help each other understand the complexity to it, and understand that though for a great many people sometimes it will seem very dark, if we expand upon light and we project it into those scenarios, then people find it to be a lot more graced and a lot more serene. And so they exit in a sense of fulfillment, that they have lived a life well. And though it may seem arbitrary to some who don't have faith, To the faithful, what we know is that we will be met with open arms by whatever it is that our soul and us as a personalities have agreed upon seeing in that final moment. And so, for those who don't have a faith and don't believe in life at that point, and the possibility that our consciousness goes on beyond the physical world, then understand that what you are projecting as an experience and result will be what you get. And so, for a lot of us who are conscious leaders, we don't ever want people to feel alone and cold. And that's something that happens, in my humble opinion, when you don't find a sense of serenity and faith or in a belief structure of any kind. If you're disconnected from your soul, then there's very little that your soul can do for us as beings in order to help that transition be more in alignment with what it's meant to be, which is a celebration of the end of a year. It's your graduation, right? A lot of us who are very spiritual have come to understand death to be just a doorway. And though we don't know what waits for us outside of the simulation, we do understand and gravitate towards the light of it and understand that it is an upliftment moment. It's a release of all things, and kind of in the right context, almost like an orgasmic experience for those who have lived a life of peace and serenity and joy and harmony and have been of service to humanity. It is a celebratory experience. And I started to think about it as I was writing the piece, and I realized that a lot of it has to do with my upbringing and having been born in New Orleans, where we celebrate with, end of life Mardi Gras parades. And we go out and we celebrate, like some people do with wakes. And so what it does is it kind of alleviates the strain of the burden to it, and instead refocuses our intention in the joy of the celebratory moment. When we look at death, for me in particular, I've noticed that I look at it like I'm sending off a family or someone I care about in joy, and I allow them to be free to fly wherever they're meant to go. And I don't focus on the fact that they're going, I'm focused on the fact of what they did in their lifetime. And isn't that kind of the point of what conscious leadership is? It's not just about singular focus, it's about a collective vision. And one of the best blessings we can give each other is that peace, is that understanding that though no one ever wants to finish a school year feeling like they haven't completed all their tasks and all of that stuff, it is to the soul just another year in the academy. It doesn't register the weight the way that we do, because it doesn't get stuck in the possessions aspect of the world. It doesn't take ownership of everything and everybody around them, and understands that when Jesus spoke upon the last days of earth, that he will whisper onto your ear to go ahead and go, and he feels bad for women who have children because they won't be able to let go of that. They'll be anchored. And that was one of the things that was mentioned in the movie that I had seen last night, which was the realization that when you don't let go and you don't release yourself of the forgiveness that it was your time to go, that you anchor yourself in fear and dread, and you make the experience come across to yourself as something terrifying, like a horror movie, like the Grim Reaper is going to come and get you and all this stuff. But in truth, it's just you graduating and going on to something bigger, something better, something wilder, something more explosive, and something that really brings you the next leveling up scenario, where you've completed this senior year of high school and now you're going to college. Now your soul is going on to be part of the Great Creators Academy, to learn how to be a creationist, or to learn how things operate in the simulated experience. So when we talk about the topic like this, it allows people, even if they disagree, to be kind of disarmed in the sense that they're no longer going to be looking at it like it's the terrifying Grim Reaper horror movie slasher scenario, and instead may find solace in the peace and serenity that they believe their faith to give them. And as they exit, they lift. And when they rise, they don't anchor themselves to the earth, and they don't get stuck in reliving the same things over and over again, not understanding that they haven't passed on. And so when we're really looking at it, at the core of the conversation is really about transitions and endings. And it's always important to remind ourselves that every ending is a beginning. Everything is cyclical. And while the rest of the world is terrified of death, a lot of us are understanding that we're immortal souls, and we'll come back to the academy when it's time, when we've taken some rest and we've really gone through the end of life review, and we've taken stock of what it is that we did well or where we failed, and what are the things that we can do better this next time. And with a lot of that comes a lot of joy and understanding that if you've done well in your life and you've been of great service to someone, even if it's just one person, then you acquire great karma. And so your evolution isn't always negatively going downwards. If you've lived a life of compassion, empathy, integrity, humility, and kindness, you're going to be experiencing an upgrade. And even if you don't necessarily come back, let's say that you are relieved of your karma overall, which is the last video I talked about, that doesn't mean that you're not being promoted, that your soul isn't getting to experience something that it's yet to ever truly understand. Remember, many people on our planet have been great servicemen to humanity, and we don't really know what happens to them because all we really know is the negative side of karma. Many of us have been trapped in a very long cycle within this planet where what we've experienced is more of the non-release of karma, and kind of always feeling like you have to pay it down, and there's always suffering, and there's always, some sort of debt that must be paid. But where we're at as an evolutionary species is representing now an opportunity for many of us to understand that when we next leave, the next chapter or the next school year of our academy will be into something that has never happened before because of the tireless work of all these incredibly gifted spiritual leaders, conscious leaders, humanitarians, all of these people who have really stepped up to try to be of service to the planet. And so when I wrote this piece, what I was specifically speaking to was the tone in which we as conscious leaders can present topics that can feel heavy. And with so many dark things happening on the planet, specifically with our children and the sacrifices that they're going through, basically over corruption and hypocrisy, where we're allowing them to be slaughtered in their own schools, we have to find a way to either rearrange that and make sure that that stops happening, or we're going to have to start addressing as conscious leaders what the process is of death and helping people find solace in that. Because there's nothing more traumatic in our world than to bury a child, and nothing more traumatic than to bury somebody who dies young. But yet we won't talk about it. And so where this was coming from in my heart was trying to help children and people understand that it's not something to be afraid of in a world that it might literally give that to them. And what kind of service are we being to these incredible souls that may be leaving early if we don't present them with the opportunity to believe that it's something magical on the other side? Something that gives them faith and hope that if their life is cut short, that they will have a rainbow and that they will be carried in the rainbow up to heaven, whatever their heaven is. Isn't that a much better way for us as a collective to use our energies and to speak on this topic that's uncomfortable, because it's not asking for something negative to come towards us. It's just allowing for the possibility that if something out of our hands happens, that we give our children and our family the opportunity to celebrate that journey beyond and take away the fear that keeps them stuck into a system or a situation where they're afraid to let go. And I think that's horrible. I think that is the epitome of purgatory to me, is this idea that because of the physical world or because of the things that we're experiencing in our simulated lives, that at some point it may be time for us to let go and we won't be able to. And if we can't do that as a species, then we can't evolve, because all we ever hear is the negative side of it, the people who are so terrified. I mean, if you think about it, more often than not, when we talk on this controversial topic, what we speak to is the fear-mongering side of it, the aspect that makes people feel uncomfortable, and it makes them terrified of going home. And I've always thought that fascinating. Of all the things that I look forward to on my journey, it is my journey home. Because home is where the divine lives, whatever you believe that all to be, the Allah, Buddha, the Messiah, like all of them live in the after, that what happens beyond the experience that we're all sharing. So then why are we so ingrained in this belief that we must be terrified of it? Does it speak more to the fact that we as a species have reached the point where we don't celebrate each day and that we take each day for granted. And instead of feeling bad about that realization, why not help our collective realize that instead of feeling bad about it, why don't you just start enjoying it? Why don't you take back your power and go out and do movies and do whatever it is that makes you truly happy, understanding that it's not like we're saying that tomorrow will be your last day on planet Earth. But if it was, wouldn't you want to just be like, oh, okay, it's over. Oh, I wonder what's next. Notice the change in your soul signature in hearing that verbiage. Oh my God, what's next? As opposed to, no, I can't, I'm too afraid. You're afraid of what? The all? You're afraid to know yourself at that deepest core level? You're afraid to look back upon your life and realize that you did it well and that you passed your tests? Is that the fear? Or are we so indoctrinated into believing that death is the end that when it approaches us, we become terrified to meet our maker when you are the maker's dream? Right? The all created you in his or her image. And so that should be an incredibly empowering journey that we as a species should be sharing together because it's universal. There's no one who escapes death. Everybody lives and dies. It's the yin and the yang. So why not start talking as groups, as peers, as panels about the upliftment to humanity? And that if we're going to worry about something that's like 10 years down the road or 15 years, then take the ownership and the empowerment stance to then speak on behalf of it in a way that makes people who are closer to the edge find peace in those final moments. I'm going to give you a perfect example. When I had a really bad fever, I had a super bad fever, I think it was 107, and I literally went into an unconscious state and I was essentially dying. And what I was met with being on a ship, and I think I've written about this, but I've never spoken on it. I was met with I was on a boat, and I was in the Sea of Souls, something that I wasn't conscious of before having gone to it. And I was sitting third row from the window, and the window broke, and me and the other two people that were right next to me were sucked out into the Sea of Souls. The other two went immediately down, and I was able to tread water lightly. And as I was doing so, I realized where I was and that it was over. And instead of feeling panic about it, I just felt light. And what it did is I stopped having to struggle as much to stay afloat. Well, lo and behold, right in front of me, I kid you not, a train comes from what seems like under the water and heads up towards the heavens. And there's all these, as I jokingly put in the article piece from the past, I wrote, and there's all these Anglo-Saxon white faces staring out the window with smiles on their faces going up for judgment. And there I was in the water, and I was floating, but I was a little miffed. I was like, well, how come they got to go? And as soon as I said that, in that state of high fever, I was immediately taken before the boss, and I do mean the boss. Though it didn't appear the way that we, in the human form, would understand it. And the question was simple: how'd it go? And I remember saying, it went well, I was pretty comfortable. I had been so exhausted by that point. I had yet to go really into the spiritual path. I was still in the dark night of the soul, and it was kind of like a check-in, I guess, but I didn't know that consciously at the time. And so I basically was like, you know what? I'm relieved that it's done, and I'm very blessed to have had the opportunity to be there. And I said, my grace and all that stuff, and I did my last prayer. And then, just as I was about to just let it go, out of nowhere, my heart sang to me a song, and it said, "But I never got to experience love." And I said it out loud to the being before me. I'm just gonna call him a being. And literally, I remember that out of that, I felt a pull on myself, and so I reached my hand out. And wouldn't you know it, the soul reached their hand back to me. And as soon as we touched, I remember there was a spark. And in that spark, all of these metallic hands started to surround me, very small hands. And it started to make the sound of clock starting up again, and went tick, 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 tick. And the hands carried me all the way back down and threw me back into the body. And I sprang up, drenched in sweat, completely out of it, realizing how bad everything was going on. And I had to go to the hospital the whole 9 because it was like I was dying. And what it revealed to me is that I had faith. And what it showed me is I had once, as a kid, heard about in church. I can't remember what I think it was in Latin Mass. And they had talked about it, and my grandma was present, about when the ship sails and something else. It was some sort of passage. And I remember that I guess in that state, what came through was the innocence of that purifying moment. And I remember thinking, oh, I'm on the boat. And so when the boat broke, I was still able to tread water. And it was in that sentence, when I became conscious of that sentence, that I realized something about Jesus. And I realized something about what it means to walk on water. And so as I was going through that experience, I remember that one day I would speak on it, and I never really understood it as far as speaking it into the outside world, because at the time all I really could muster was to write about it because of the detail. And I felt on the defensive about how people would target me or attack me because of what I experienced, or just negative backlash that you get when you share your story sometimes. And so I had kept it to written form. But because of what's going on in our world and the severity by which it's getting progressively more devolved, de-evolved, is that even a word? We're going to go with it. The more that we devolve, the more that I realize that it becomes something really important to share with other people. Because when you experience a near-death experience, you become more valuing of life. And you never take a single day for granted. And you start to enjoy the world around you in a way that you never really thought was possible. For example, all through the pandemic, all I would do is look at flowers. And I used to literally just focus my attention on the detail of the flower and ponder into my higher consciousness. Wow, the intricacy to this design versus the color palette to the world around us. And then I would do this thing where my depth perception started to grow as it moved. And what I realized was that I stopped being afraid of death. And I understood that when it was time, I would be okay, because I had already been through it. And what it showed me is that if I had not anchored myself because of the loss of never having been in love, I would have gone home. And so I felt robbed because I had allowed fear and the indoctrination that we shouldn't let go to make me feel guilty for not having experienced everything that I needed to experience in this world. And I robbed myself of the journey home. But in that came a blessing, in the sense that I was able to then become highly spiritual and became very connected to the earth and to the divine. And what it allowed me was the freedom to explore the conscious mind and what that means as a collective vision. And it brought me towards divinity that I could never have had, but notice that all of it surrounds the topic of death. And what I realize now when looking back upon that time is that I don't think I would be as blessed as I am without having to conquer that fear of death. And though it's not something that I ever wish upon another human being, it is something natural that happens at the end of our scholastic soul year, right? Like at the end of the year for our soul, because it's just a minute for the soul, right? It's literally just probably what a year is to us is probably what our entire lifetime is to a soul. And so it's just a fleeting moment to it. It knows that if it needs to finish something up or come back or to go on to the next level, that it will. But yet as humans, we project our fear and our indoctrination into believing that we must stay trapped in suffering or that we must stay trapped in this situation. Because if we allow ourselves the freedom to look forward to what happens next, then we release ourselves of the chains that bind us to the planet Earth. And though she is a magical school, a lot of our people aren't living very long anymore, if you think about it. And it's a tragic situation, but we need to decide, are we as a species going to stop killing each other, stop genociding entire populations, stop hurting children and having them killed at schools through the hypocrisy and greed that almost seems to be sacrificing our fellow brothers and sisters? Or are we finally going to deal with the topic of what we're handing them if we don't do something? Either way, it just becomes more and more oppressive. And so instead of doing that, what I wanted to speak to in the piece was to allow us as a species the knowledge and the wisdom that it's okay to talk about it. Because when you do, something you say may ignite something in a non-believer or just another person's mind of a paradise they never thought of, where their soul will gift them that last fleeting conscious thought image and will allow them the beauty and majesticness to that, and will allow that to be the very last thing that you consciously remember upon this earth. So, in looking at it from that standpoint, what I was pointing out was, isn't that the best gift you can give humanity? Is the knowledge that if you truly believe there is a heaven, whatever your house says that will be, will be. Because it will be all of your lasting energy will be in the personification of getting you to that exact spot. Or what if you and your family have a conversation one day, thanks to all that's going on with war and all that stuff, where you say that if something ever happens to us as a family and you can't find me in the afterlife, then look for me where we had vacation that one time where we were all laughing and giggling and where we were celebrating our love as a unit, and we will meet you there. And because the person believes that, it will be there, and you will all be there, and you will guide to each other forward. Isn't that where we as conscious leaders should be aiming our people? Instead of being afraid of the inevitable and focusing on that inevitability, why not empower humanity to see it for what it is? It's a blessing. We spend our lives complaining about how hard it is. Every single person on planet Earth spends not all of it, but a lot of time until they find their path, spiritual path, and their purpose. We spend it complaining about how difficult life is. But we're learning. And without those difficulties, we can't learn. But upon the day that we're handed finally the pass, the hall pass, to leave this horrible, tremendously bad experience where all it is suffering, we immediately don't want to go. So the dynamic is very confusing to the higher consciousness, because if we don't want to go, then why don't we celebrate every moment and stop complaining, right? And that's like a triggering moment for a lot of you who are watching this. Like, well, I can't help it. Like, it's out of my control. Yes, but what is in your control is the way you react and how you embrace the challenges and changes. It's not easy. I mean, look at my life. But what I'm saying is, when you grow in that direction, what ends up happening is lessons become blessings, and you are able to then guide others to learn how to walk that direction, as opposed to going downwards towards fear-mongering and hatred and genocide and homophobia, sex, all those negative things that trap us to the human world over possession and greed and corruption and things that we think matter, which, again, is only a splitting second in the mind of the all. But for us, because we're so ingrained in the physical world and not understanding that there's so much more waiting for us to understand and learn, we're like stuck in prison. And the best thing to do in order to free humanity of the prison is to beam light into the prison, making it a prism from which all of the rainbow strands branch out in every direction. And every soul is able to then go wherever it is that they think they're going to go. Because remember, your experience is built upon your understanding of the world around you. So though you may not be a person of faith, my point is simple. When you have faith in whatever it is, it gives you an aim, and your soul then projects that as your last moment in earth. And you get what you asked for. But if you don't expect anything and there's nothing waiting for you, then wouldn't that be the most terrifying death on the planet? To believe that when it's over, it just goes black. That's what you get if you believe that, because you're projecting that into the universe, while the rest of us are getting paradise because we believe it will be there. And that's what my point was. I hope you guys have a wonderful day, but I just wanted to explain to you where I was coming from, because for so long we have made it taboo to talk about something that happens to everybody, and it makes people afraid, and when you're afraid you make bad choices, which just makes things worse. But if you embrace the change, whatever degree it is, then you succeed, because you learn And what happens is that energy affects the collective consciousness, and more light and information begins to seep through into our conscious minds, allowing humanity to finally accept that we don't live forever, but while we're here, we better make the best of it. Bye.